Well, you're going to be hearing a lot about numbers during this election campaign, and we want to try and find some way to make sense of those numbers in a bunch of different ways over the course of the election campaign. And to help us do that, we're going to be joined by David Coletto, the CEO of Abacus Data, public opinion research firm. And many of you will know he's a frequent guest here and contributor at CPAC, and he's with us again for the election campaign. David, we're going to talk about the key important issues to Canadians as we head into this campaign, and we're going to particularly focus in this part of our conversation on healthcare and Pharmacare. But I want to start first by giving some sense from you about what you see your role here in helping people understand all the numbers they're going to hear, both from Abacus Data, but from a lot of polling firms during this election campaign.
Well, you know, we get tons of polls released over the course of the election. I guess my job is going to be making sense of that all. For us, you know, it's not just the horse race, although that will be a prominent part of the conversation, obviously. But during a campaign, a lot of things can happen. Campaigns matter. What dynamics are the polls picking up? Are certain events, moments in that election campaign having an impact? What issues do people talk about? We're going to talk about issues today, but does a campaign move one issue up or down depending on the debates that we're having? So I'm here to make sense of it all and help, most importantly, the viewers understand what's going on during the campaign. And
we appreciate you taking the time to do that. So we're going to get to, healthcare and Pharmacare in just a moment because it is a big issue. But let's see where it ranks, because let's start off the conversation with what issues Canadians are saying will be driving their votes in this election campaign.
Right, and we regularly ask this, and this question in this case was, what 5 issues are going to be most important in determining your vote in October? And what we find is there's a large number that sort of top the list. And the reason they don't add up to 100 for the viewers is because you can pick 5. And so cost of living is at the top of the list during this election. 55% of Canadians selected that. We're going to talk about healthcare, and look, healthcare is number 2. 42% said access to healthcare is a top issue, followed by climate change at 39%, taxes at 38%. You can see the economy, poverty and inequality, housing, which is often framed around housing affordability, immigration policies, government spending and deficits, and then the cost and availability of medicines, which is connected to healthcare, rounds out this top tier of issues. These are all issues in which at least 1 out of 4 Canadians ranked in their top 5.
Okay, so we know we're going to hear a lot in this campaign about, I'm not sure how much we'll hear about access to health care and those kinds of things, although we should, because it's always a top issue for Canadians. But I think we'll hear a lot about Pharmacare and those kinds of things. There is an access issue, obviously, in the Pharmacare piece. Let's start with access to health care and look at the level of concern across the country that you're picking up. What did you find? Yeah,
this is one of those issues where it's not consistent across the country. While, you know, at least a quarter of Canadians in every province or region care about health care, Alberta the lowest at 27%. There are areas where it's a greater concern, and in particular, Atlantic Canada at 50%, majority of Atlantic Canadians said this is their top issue. It's the #1 issue in Atlantic Canada, and to some, less so, but still prominent in Quebec, right? 48% of Quebecers, and Ontario 42%. You get into the prairies, it's 41%, and then on the far west coast, only 1/3 of British Columbians put in their top issue. So, you know, and just as an anecdote, you know, you hear stories in Atlantic Canada about the lack of family doctors or hospitals closing because they can't find physicians.
Or having to travel outside the Maritimes or Atlantic Canada to get the health care you need.
This is a prime issue in Atlantic Canada and to some extent in Quebec, and so I think voters there are probably going to be listening to see what their federal leaders say about this issue.
Well, let's go there. So if this is one of the key issues, and it is, so what do they say about the parties with the best approach to access to health care?
Well, the Liberals have a slight advantage on this issue. 26% of those who care about this issue think the Liberals would do the best job or have the best approach on it, followed by the New Democrats at 18% and the Conservatives at 16%. The big picture is no one party has an obvious advantage, right? This is an issue that the New Democrats typically do better on than on other issues for them. It still, though, has a very high level of undecided. So, and that makes sense because, you know, healthcare is a provincial responsibility, particularly access to healthcare and delivery of care. And so our federal politicians don't often talk about it specifically. But I always hear, well, it's always at the top of the list, always at the top of the list. You know, and politicians and the parties aren't probably going to do much about it. I do think, though, I suspect that the candidates at the doorsteps, because it's such a high issue, will likely hear something about it. And there's an opportunity here for the parties to offer up.
I mean, what's the message? The message here is, I think, as I see it, it's an issue. And secondly, there's this high body of people who aren't sure. Yeah. So that if you've got a plan you think can win over Canadians and you plan to follow through on it, there's an audience waiting to hear it.
Yeah, and it's something we didn't highlight. It's an audience that's of all ages, right? Similar to like affordability issues. If you're young, you're worried about maybe your aging parents. If you're older, you're worried about your own health care. If you have kids, like it's an issue that affects everybody. And so I just think it's something that may not be part of the campaign, but I think voters are going to be asking questions about it.
All right, we know we're going to hear about Pharmacare.
Right.
We're already hearing about Pharmacare. So you asked, about the party with the best approach to dealing with the prescription drug challenges. What do you find? And
here, really no one advantage for any party. The Liberals are slightly ahead of the New Democrats, 22% of those. Of the 25% of Canadians, out of the 1 out of 4 Canadians who said cost and availability of medicines is a top issue, 22% said the Liberals were the best on it, the NDP at 19% and the Conservatives at 15%, and a big number, 31% say unsure. Again. And I think it's really interesting, right, given how prominent this issue has been for the Liberal government, right? They haven't really moved aggressively on an issue, but they've been talking about this, and it's been in the budget in terms of they had the advisory committee and Dr. Hoskins.
They've promised a form of some kind of national pharmacare, but they're not saying whether it'll be universal public paid. That might have a mix of private stuff.
Exactly.
That might only,
so we don't really know what the Liberals are going to offer.
The NDP say they're doing it full universal, and they'll do it by 2020. The Conservatives, they're leaning towards a plan that would cover people who don't have coverage now. But if you have private plans at your workplace, then we'd leave the system basically the way it is, right?
And so, I look at this data, while the public policy is important, is there a political argument to be made? Like, is there political gain here to making this issue more prominent in the campaign? Frankly, I look at this data and I say no. I think there's other issues that are more divisive and more clear for one party to have an advantage on. Doesn't mean if the Liberals make this a focus or the NDP push this issue hard that it won't become prominent. But right now, I think a lot of Canadians care about this issue, and they're waiting to see what the parties promise. The NDP's already rolled out theirs, but some of the others aren't. The details aren't there, so wait and see, I think.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. David Coletto, thank you.
Thanks, Peter.